Now we are going to transition over to our next presenter, and I'm going to be joined. Uh, it's sort of continuing this same theme, right? Which is moving left, shifting left with our security around API. So this talk, we've got Alex Savage from Advanced, and he's going to walk us through API standards and shift left security.
Hello, Christine. Hello, everybody. How are we doing today?
Hello, Alex. Great. Where are you joining us from?
I'm actually just outside of London in the UK.
Well, welcome and good evening for you. Thanks for joining us pretty late in your day. Great to have you.
Thank you. Thanks for having us today. So just kicking off really. So hello, my name's Alex Savage and my pronouns are he and him. And today we're going to talk about API standards and shifting security left. So I'm going to say it's my first time speaking at a conference. So what a conference to speak at, being API days online rather than in person. And just a little bit about me before we get going. So I'm currently head of integrations at a company called Advanced. So we're a leading UK, mainly business to business software vendor. We've got a lot of products and therefore a lot of APIs. I'm really lucky to be at Advanced and have a great team of people around me where we actually enable around 800 global engineering staff at Advanced with API standards, consulting, tooling, really in that world of APIs and integrations. And we kind of pride ourselves in it being very inclusive and really trying to push away from that whole traditional COE ivory towers thing. We're really all about enablement and how to make it easier and more efficient for teams to do work. Outside of work, I kind of like adventures with my young family. I'm a bit of a nerd. I like barbecues, Lego, cars. If they're cars about Lego, I'm into it as well. And I'm really here today as I'm kind of passionate about APIs and really want to see how they can be used to solve people's problems and connect people together. So it's really important that they're done safely and securely. If you've got any questions for me, please feel to put them in the comments. Otherwise, if you want to catch me afterwards, send me a message on LinkedIn. Otherwise, we've got a great community on Slack. If you Google APIs you won't hate, you'll find us there, and look forward to any questions. So kicking off, I'm actually going to start with a question. I'm just going to pause on this slide for a second and ask everyone to pause and think, what do you see? Some of you might be thinking, yeah, Alex, this bunch of cars. Who are they made by? It's not a very high resolution picture, but perhaps some of you pick out who they're made by. But what else do you notice? Are there any similarities? Perhaps what things come to mind when you kind of look at that picture? Maybe some of you are going, oh yes, they're really consistent. You know, they're all grey cars, they're all arranged, but they have that definitely consistent. Maybe some people are thinking that's a car that I've got or a car I'd like. It's a very safe or secure car. Maybe some people are thinking, yeah, they're a bunch of really reliable cars. They've got good customer experience, definitely performant, pretty modern looking, but they're definitely recognizable. So I'm going to ask a follow-on question. Shouldn't modern software be the same? Consistent, safe, good customer experience, recognizable. What about APIs? I think we've seen this change over the last decade. Mobile phones coming out with the iPhone and apps. It's kind of an expectation today that if you've got a application, it's going to be a consistent user experience. It's going to look familiar. And I'm going to challenge and say, shouldn't APIs be the same? Adding to that, the complexities of how a lot of us do business today and how a lot of us operate. We have development teams across the world working in different time zones, working with different languages, stacks, and how on earth can we possibly make that consistency at that global scale? Now, I'm going to say, some of you might be thinking, isn't this a security track? I'm going to say, bear with me, it's going to be worth it. So if you want APIs to be consistently good and consistently secure, where do you start? Especially if you've got multiple products, multiple languages, tech stacks, different clouds, you probably do some research. And that's really what we did. We first looked at it and went, we need a consistent way to describe APIs that wasn't really tied to any of our underlying implementations or languages. And a bit of Googling actually turned up there's many, many options here. So we did our research. We had a look at Postman's State of the API report that I've got on screen. There's many, many of these reports where they ask the world and say, hey, what do you use? How do you describe APIs? Do you do design first? All of these things. And ultimately, what we advanced settled on was we're going to go Open API 3, because that seemed to be the kind of the way the world was going in terms of describing the behaviors for APIs. And we wanted something that we could really rely on for our future. So we've got this idea of consistency. We've got this idea of a language agnostic way of describing APIs. How do we take that and say, this is what the Audi of APIs, or in our case, the advanced of APIs looks like? We've got this way to describe them. What should they look like? So this is really where our kind of quest towards standardization, and we will get to security, I promise. This is where this quest came from. And we've got a REST API, and we're very, very focused on REST APIs. I probably should have started with that at the beginning. But what does a good REST API need to look like? So we've got this open API specification, and inside it, it says you've got something called paths. Paths is where a client would make a call to, those calling the API. That's where they're going to make this request, and they're going to send some of these HTTP methods to it. But what should they be called? How should they be cased? What security should you use? What we actually found when we stopped and paused, there was literally hundreds of questions that you could ask yourself about what does good look like? What's documentation like? And crucially, what is the implementation going to be like? And all of these things have a material difference on the customer experience. So what we actually did is, in the UK, we have this thing called a Blue Peter moment. Here's one I made earlier. We actually didn't use ours. We went with somebody else's, and we went with a company called Zalando, who are a European fashion provider. And they've actually had a really good API style guide or API standards. It was fully fledged. It was pretty opinionated. But when we were researching it, it was very highly spoken of in the community. So we thought, yeah, we'll give it a go. We did a project. And then we spoke to our developers about it, and they said, we don't like snake case. We like JavaScript. Why are you asking us to do snake case? So what we actually realized is we couldn't just use somebody else's. We were kind of in it for the long run, and we needed to do our own. I'd say we were maybe a little bit behind the curve, but we've made some good progress. Since we started looking at this about 3 years ago, there are so many of these public style guides. Some cover security, and some are more generic, that people have actually managed to put together a veritable yellow pages of API style guides. So I put 2 on screen there. So we've got one by API Handyman, another one by Dret. I think he's speaking today. Eric is his name. I definitely recommend checking these out for some inspiration. So what we learned from this Zalando experiment was standards were going to be successful. They've got to be a democratic effort. We couldn't just go and use somebody else's and everybody would adopt it. So what we actually did in these early days is we kind of started creating a standards by committee. So somebody would come to us and say, hi, how do we do this? How do we do a file upload? How do we do security? And it ended up being quite an interesting democratic solution of summoning some people together to say, on this day, we're going to decide what pagination looks like, what versioning looks like. And this idea of trying to bring people together actually helped move the standards on and got people to buy in with it. So I know some people are maybe, oh, you've got to just, fly the flag, make the decisions, move things forward. We actually found that doing it democratically and involving people and trying to be as inclusive as possible actually helped the standards grow, helped adoption, and ultimately helped lots of teams put out some really good APIs. So we did all this kind of research and this collaboration and everything. We ended up learning what I would say was a substantial amount of information, especially around what API security and really what good looks like. I promise would be some security. We'll do some more in a minute. So that sounds great, but there's so far down that road you get, and then you end up with really great standards, and perhaps it's resonated with some people. Maybe you've got a Confluence page or a README file on GitHub, and you end up with this kind of picture on the right for the development teams, and then sometimes you've got this picture on the left where you've got maybe a governance team or a COE saying, hi, if you can make all your APIs in line with our standards, that would be great, thanks. So some of the development teams are looking at it going, this is impossible. How am I possibly going to make an API compliant with this thing? I understand that, yeah, it's kind of best practice, but it's slowing me down. It's ineffective. How am I going to do this? Let me know in the comments if this is resonating with the stuff that you got going on. So it's got to be a better way, right? We've already heard, I think Sandeep's mentioned it in the previous session. Eventually, we're going to have LLMs and GPT is going to solve all the things. But what about today? Can there be a better way today? I think if we were doing it again, and the advice I would give to all of you, if you don't have standards today and maybe not got there, is really start on clear, prioritized rules, starting what really matters, and that is going to be security. So don't get me wrong, styling is important too, but I think we got pretty hung up on what does casing look like and what are the schemes for pagination. Security should have been the first one. So don't do what I did. Get straight in there and say, okay, what does good API security look like? We're still seeing, if any of you are subscribed to apisecurity.io's newsletter, so if not, have a look. I think Colin's speaking at API Days today, who's the editor for it. API security has got to be a top priority for all of us. And really what brings this alive is if you can take good security, good rules, and then bring a linter or a validator into play, you're really, really going to be off to the races. So starting out with that, what does good API security look like? That's your top priority. Yeah. What are going to be acceptable security types? Are you going to say, we're going to go full in on OAuth 2? Are we going to be, if anyone uses basic auth, we'll tell them, please don't release APIs with basic auth. What are you going to do? And trying to write that down and then automate it so you can be everywhere for these teams without being there. Some of the other ones I wanted to call out, versioning, have a good versioning policy, have it in your API standards. So when teams are making new APIs, from the get-go, they're saying, hi, this is on version 1, or this is how we version, and already having that foundations in there to have those conversations with consumers in the future to say, hi, we've got this fantastic new feature, but we're going to have to make a breaking change, which means a new version. Have all the foundations in there ready to have that conversation. Other really important thing for security, think about rate limiting. So we're creating APIs to allow other people to benefit from the stuff that we've made. How do we make sure that they're being good consumers and safe consumers without maybe getting a bit excited and using up all of our capabilities? And definitely the need for both authentication and authorization. There's ways that you can see if they're implemented, make sure that that's in your rule set. Some people might be thinking, wow, Alex, this is just common knowledge, common sense. But definitely looking at the breaches that are still happening today, that's not the case. We're still seeing services being put out there with no authentication at all. It's a public API, and just because somebody happened to be using the user interface through a login doesn't mean that the API is accessible. So I think it's really important that we kind of look at what we've got and look at when we're making stuff. How can we make secure API design as easy as possible for our probable many teams? So just put along the bottom that there's actually many tools that can help with this. We're a big user of Spectral, which is from the Stoplight team, a free open source linter, but there's some other ones available out there. Please feel free to do a little Google, have a little look. And if you want to know more about these tools, I don't work for any of these people. We just use some of the tools, and I'm happy to give you a pointer on how to get started. The thing I want everybody to walk away from today is really thinking, APIs are for everyone, right? One of my friends, Frank from SmartBear, actually, because APIs are all people inclusive. And I think that's a really important thing to take away of, we're stronger together. We're using each other's stuff to solve real customer problems. So how do we make sure that we do that in a really safe way? So automation's great, and the API is coming for all of our, AI is coming for all of our jobs. But I still think there is a place, and it's so important that we still do API reviews. Some of the things that API reviews will help, especially if you can get somebody outside of the team to do it, is that kind of fresh point of view. What's a consumer going to think when they look at this API design? Are they going to go look at it and go, wow, this feels just like PayPal, or just feels like Microsoft, it's really good? Or are they going to go, oh, I'm not sure about that. This, maybe you've got some coupling here. Getting that fresh point of view from people is definitely going to help give you that check. Does it make sense? Does it provide value? And would that consumer think it's safe? I think that's definitely something we're going to see more and more of is as consumers of APIs become more savvy, more aware of what good looks like. If you've got old security types, or you've maybe got some things in your API that somebody might question, that might put off a consumer and miss out on somebody losing your stuff. I think a final thing to say about reviews is reviews are a great way to get new rules. So we've got hundreds of APIs at Advanced. I remember seeing an API review and somebody was returning application JSON, JASON, because they were new to APIs and somebody said, yeah, it returns application JSON, not JSON. So we made a rule out of it. And that's definitely something which we would definitely suggest that you look at is anything you do in a review, great way to feed through to your next review, great way to automate. You've definitely saved some time and effort. And we estimate at the moment that we have about 100 custom rules that we've created with Spectral. And actually per project, that's 120 people days saved to get an API out right first time. So if you think about how many APIs your team are creating and the lifecycle management from that, there's a significant amount of money and time to be saved if we get it right first time. So bringing us to a close, coming into land, my kind of advice to you would be definitely look at designing your APIs in an implementation or agnostic language free way, such as OpenAPI or JSON schema. And within that, make sure that you've got good security guidelines or safeguards that says this is what APIs can do. And then looking at things like styling, casing, meta schemas for pagination or whatever, definitely they're a bonus, but let's lock in on security rules first and then we'll worry about the rest. Definitely get people to review them and review them before you code. You know, you're going to pick up some things before, and this is where I'm hearing some amazing stuff happening about AI in this area, giving an open API to ChatGPT-4 and it comes back and says, this is good, but you know, this string that you're sending, why don't you put a pattern on it? You've got no minimum or maximum values. Somebody could go and send the entirety of Shakespeare to your API. What's it going to do? And if you do that, you're going to get these kind of high fidelity, high definition API definitions. You're going to get better code gen out of it. It's going to be less bugs and again, more safety and security through your validation. I haven't specifically mentioned it today, but if you've got a good API and good API definition, you can actually get a head start with your tests. So a tool I wanted to call out is a tool called Portman. It's a free open source tool. And that actually ingests an open API definition and it will give you a bunch of really good tests. So imagine you want to have a blanket test to say all APIs we will test turning security off and see what happens. So you can write that in Portman and say, give me an open API definition. I will give you a Postman test that says, unless you returned 401 for every operation in this API, you don't get a pass. So some fantastic free open source tools available to help us make better APIs. So finally, when you release stuff, observe it. There's loads of tools out there that are starting to really make waves that you can feed an open API definition to. With as long as you've got these good security rules, it will then observe and report what your release traffic's doing. What does production look like? Have we got anything that people are doing things that aren't inside the API definition, and being able to apply rules on those firewalls to say, hi, sorry, this is only allowing 100 characters and somebody's trying to send 150. We'll just stop the communication there. So really trying to bring us in, let's make these APIs as consistently safe as possible while providing real value for our consumers. So before I finish, I wanted to actually call out a couple of teams doing some amazing stuff in the world of API security rules that are really going to help you shift security left. So at the very top here, we've got the team at Stoplight. They've put together an OWASP top 10 aligned security rules for Spectral. So again, this is free rules and a free tool. What's stopping you having a look at it? Next up, my friend Roberto and the team over there at the Italian government. They've got some fantastic rules there, which you can check out and use. And finally, at the bottom, there's us at Advanced. We've got 100 custom rules in Spectral. And if you download the link there, it'll give you a JS file that you can go and feed into Spectral. It's a bit like Zalendo's. It's highly opinionated, but it's going to get you going, and then you're free to take out the rules that you don't agree with. Thanks very much, Christine, and thank you everyone for listening. Let me know if you've got any questions.
Yeah, that was a fantastic session. I really, and again, I know I keep saying it, but I appreciate all of the practical advice that you guys are providing and all of the different resources that you are all providing as well and linking off to. I think that that makes a world of difference for all of us who are practitioners. I had one question, and it's more around maybe frameworks and practices than kind of the latter half of your talk, and that's, I don't know if it's different maybe in the UK. I know that on the OWASP side, we talked about it a little bit in one of the sessions this morning. They have the application security verification standard, but it's pretty light on API specific guidance, right? Like, how do you architect a good API? They've got placeholders, so I'm optimistic that there's some good guidance and frameworks coming, hopefully, in version 5.0. But are there others that you guys looked at that maybe you referenced or we can call out again, that even all the way up from the very beginning when you're planning and you're, kind of creating more of an API security or an API architecture standards in your organization, are there places that you guys have found are really good resources that are kind of good frameworks or models even just to go play with and model your own off of?
So I think I maybe misspoke. There's actually an OWASP API top 10. So our first cut of it came out in 2019 by the team there, and they kind of took the traditional OWASP top 10 and went, we need an API derivative of it, and it's really focused on the biggest problems we have with APIs. So bad object level authorization, so the typical breaches that you see loads of. I called someone's API because the UI doesn't let me edit their information, but if I talk to the API with Burp Suite, I can do whatever I want. So definitely check out the OWASP API top 10, which is just in a release candidate for the 2023 version. It's aligned closely with the OWASP top 10, but that's definitely one. The other thing I would probably shout out is just doing a bit of Googling around API security checklists. I've got so many that I can't name any at this point. Links to WallArm and teams like that are putting together a kind of checklist to say, if you're doing APIs, this is what good looks like. These are the things to check. Definitely my kind of elevator pitch for API security would be good security standards or types. So like sticking to something, we have a rule, you don't roll your own API security, you use OAuth 2 with a standard identity provider. And then you make sure that you've got both authentication, so you know who someone is, and you have authorization, you know what they can do.
Yeah. And I think, one of the things that we have here, and it probably extends somewhat to other countries as well, as PCI DSS. And I know in the most recent version of PCI DSS, they go even a step further in their requirements. So it's not, the OWASP API top 10 is a critical resource for anyone on the API security side of the house. But one of the interesting things to me was that they mandated in one of their requirements specifically around secure coding practices, not just for your own software, but any software that's developed for you. So any customer bespoke software must be developed using secure coding practices. But they made it specific to APIs in this latest version, which is great. Not just the practices themselves, but that developers actually have to take, everyone, including security, but also the development organization has to take an annual training and certification course around things like the OWASP API top 10, which is great, right? That now they're becoming much more specific about APIs versus just the broader applications, right? And so I think that that's something that we've seen that I think makes a big difference from the jump in how APIs are envisioned, how they begin to be developed, how they're implemented in software applications. So I think that's, I don't know if there's any other resources like that you've stumbled across, or regulatory requirements that maybe put, good frameworks out there that say, hey, go look at this and think about these things before you start, right?
Not that I can think of offhand, but what we're seeing out there in the market is more and more customers are saying, what can't you do through the API? So you have a SaaS product and you're creating something, and they're really interested in how can they do digital transformation. And people are asking those questions now. and it's up to us to make sure that what we're providing out there is safe and secure and is really going to solve those problems.
Yeah. Well, some great advice and some really good resources that you've shared. Appreciate it. If there are no other questions, I don't see any more in the comments, but if you do think of a question that you wanted to ask of Alex and we missed it, please feel free to continue to put those in the comments and we'll make sure that we get them to Alex and we get them answered. Thank you so much for your time, Alex.
Thank you, everyone.
Alex's session, as well as all the rest of them, will be on the API Days YouTube channel post-event. So thanks, Alex. Have a great evening.